Hello, friends, and welcome to Aydt Picks Championship Week edition. But before we begin, you guessed it, but first, coffee. So, I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. I sure did. It was good to relax with my family and especially see my grandfather. He's 88 years old. He has some Alzheimer's, but he's doing well physically for his age. He walks around unassisted, and he's a tough character, man. I'm very proud of him. All right, I'm going to get right into it. For my Ice Bites and coffee, I'm going to talk about the Great War, also known as World War I. And as promised, it's going to be less than 5 minutes. Why it happened. So, in the Berlin Conference of 1885, which divided up Africa, the major imperial powers of Europe all got together in Berlin. And at the time, Africa was divided up amongst certain colonial powers, mostly, British had claim, French had claim, but the newly formed German Empire didn't have any colonies. But the goal was to make Europe powerful economically and have all these resources from Africa stimulate the kingdoms, the monarchies of Europe and empires. And so the Berlin Conference was supposed to divide Africa well, but what it ended up doing was hurting the alliances even more, because South Africa had the Anglo-Boer War between 1899 and 1904 between the German-supported Afrikaners, which were Dutch, French, and German mixed settlers, and they spoke Afrikaans, and then they fought against the British, and the British won. And after that, it was proclaimed as British South Africa. So you had some seeds before then, and then you had a system of alliances, the Triple Entente, which was formed in 1882 by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And so Germany and Austria-Hungary, and being German-speaking nations and having similar culture, although the Austro-Germans, so native Austrians or Germans, they ran the empire. The Habsburg monarchs were technically German. But they had this long-standing empire, and they incorporated the Hungarians after 1867 to protect them from Russia. So, and then they had all these ethno-states. And so Austria-Hungary kept annexing land to get the Slavic people united with one another, and that pissed off Russia, who supported Slavic independence, and because they felt them as their brothers. And you know about us Germans, we have a lot of aggression. I say us because I'm very German. For those who didn't know, Aydt is German, and my dad's side of the family was German nobility before they came over to the U.S. in the 1800s. So, that's why I refer to us Germans. So, in the British Empire at the time, they were tough, not like they were today. They're a bunch of wusses today. They betray their own people. So, but British imperialism was huge during that time. And so World War I was basically a pissing match. And so you have the Southern Slavs, which included Serbia. They had an organization called the Black Hand, which was anti-Habsburg throne. And the heir to the Austrian throne was named Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And he was assassinated in Sarajevo. And so Austria gave Serbia an ultimatum. This was June 28, 1914, that they need to hand it over to the terrorist organization by August 28th or face invasion by Austrian troops. They didn't. Austria invaded. The First World War began. Germany had their back and invaded Belgium, whereas Austria went into Serbia and Russia attacked Germany and Austria from the east. That is that. What's my time? Any rate, I could talk all day about that. So for my thoughts on Florida's new coach, John Summerall. He talks a good game, man. That dude is intense, and I think this is what Florida's program needs. They need an alpha in there, a guy who's not gonna take nonsense, who doesn't compete in games just to compete or say, "Oh, we got better here." No, he wants to win. He made that clear, and he's going to do everything he can to win. His hires today with the defensive coordinator, Kentucky's defensive coordinator, I think that was yesterday, but the other guy from Georgia Tech, Faulkner, he seems like a really good choice. I wasn't sure about him at first because I was like, Georgia Tech's been good because Haynes King's their offense. Let me do a little research though. So I started to research him, and he was Stetson Bennett's QB coordinator. And that is a sexy resume because he was the quarterback coach when Georgia had their run from 2021 to 2022 when they won back-to-back national championships. And so he transformed Stetson Bennett, who was a walk-on backup, into a Heisman candidate. Dude runs the air raid, which is a Hal Mummy, Mike Leach type of thing. We're going to score a lot of points if it's successful. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. Buster Faulkner's his name. But the defensive coordinator, I don't know necessarily if he has to be like Kirby Smart type of defense or Muschamp type of defensive coordinator, but because Summerall's a defensive guy himself. This guy was decent at Kentucky. I mean, Mark Stoops, I don't know how much of a hand he ultimately had in the defense when this guy was coordinator. And Mark Stoops is defensive mind, and if our defense is any bit similar to the best defenses under Kentucky with greater athletes, I'm all for that, man. Overall, I apologize to Gator Nation for my attitude that I've had against Strickland. Time will tell. I'm not getting off his back until he releases the exact plan on what he's going to do at the stadium. Because if he kills our swamp, that's going to make me extremely upset with his proposed renovations. Strickland's, I don't know the guy, but he seems like he's focused on making an impression, presentation. Okay, that's fine, but once you go below surface, is it going to translate into wins? Is it going to translate into keeping tradition? I get what he's all about. Like, you know, he wants to make himself and the university appear to look good, but I don't know if he really goes into the weeds and all this. Time will tell with Summerall, but I was wrong. I think for now it's a good hire. I mean, we haven't played a game yet, so I could be completely wrong. He could be like Sunbelt Billy 2.0, which I originally predicted. So we'll see. Time will tell. I mean, he's got a lot of work to do. What he needs, absolutely 100% needs to do, is keep our best players like Jaden Baugh, especially Jaden Baugh. That man has heart, and he kept Florida from being shut out and keeping the streak alive. And he was our offense pretty much for a good part of the last 6 games, and especially against FSU. He's a special talent. He could be like Emmitt Smith at the next level. He's a generational player, and we need to make sure we keep Jaden Ball. So, I'm going to go into the championship games. I didn't pick like the MAC or the Sun Belt. Well, yeah, Sun Belt's on here. I'm sorry, because one of the teams are ranked. So I didn't pick like the MAC or the lesser conferences because none of their teams are ranked in there. I thought about it. I just didn't have time to write it all down. But I'm going to start with the Sun Belt Championship tomorrow. James Madison plays Troy. To be honest, I haven't really watched either of these teams this year. James Madison has a better record than Troy, and James Madison's a tough team. I think they win in a blowout, 57-10. I've got in the AAC championship, I've got number 22 Lane, which is coached by Florida's future coach. The agreement was that he would continue to coach them in their championship game, and also if they make the playoff, which they will if they win this championship. And that's going to be a good game versus North Texas, because North Texas's coach is also leaving. He's going to take the job at Oklahoma State. So I don't really know. I mean, I'm rooting for Summerall because that'll look good on his resume and it'll energize this fan base, the Gator Nation. But so I'm going to pick number 22 Lane over number 24 North Texas by the score of 34-10. And Summerall proves again that he's a winner. For the Big 12 championship, I've got number 4 Texas Tech playing BYU. Both of these teams have lost one game. They're both 11-1. I'll be honest, I've watched a few of BYU's games and they've got a great offense. But I haven't really seen any of Texas Tech. I know they're good. I think maybe I watched one game of theirs because they're like 2 time zones behind, and they play a lot of late games as well. But I think I know they're really well coached. Their coaches won multiple high school state championships in Texas, and that's saying a lot. That's like the state where people are obsessed with high school football. And so they took him up to the NCAA levels, and it's translated there. Plus, the thing about Texas Tech, they're going to be like the next big sports program as long as NIL doesn't have a salary cap, because people in West Texas, they are oil folks. So there's a lot of oil derricks out there, a lot of oil fields. They have some big time money. They're boosters and they're donors, so they can buy the best athletic program money can buy. That should tell you something, that, hey, money will attract those kids to Texas Tech, even though Lubbock, Texas is not exactly a prime geographic location. Most people have their price, So Texas Tech you'll notice them increasing in success in a multitude of sports, especially in college basketball last year. They took Florida to the wire, even though Florida pulled up their big boy pants and beat them in the last minute, and then went on to win a national championship. Texas Tech and Florida were in a great game in the Elite Eight. Their football team obviously having success here. I think they narrowly beat BYU for the Big 12 championship by a score of 35-28. For my SEC championship, I'm be honest, man, I'm not really looking forward to this game. I would have looked forward to it more if it were Texas A&M versus Alabama or Georgia. I was excited for Texas A&M, man, because I was thinking, man, they're still going to make the playoff, but because they only have one loss. But I was thinking, man, this is their year. Like, they haven't made an SEC championship game in their 13 years in the SEC, and this is finally it. And they've got a fan base that deserves it. But unfortunately, their rivals in Austin had something to say about it and beat them last week and kept them out of the SEC championship. And now Georgia goes, and they face a familiar opponent. Alabama's the only one who beat Georgia this year. But I believe this is a very different Georgia team. Kirby Smart has them playing at their best. Their defense has gotten better, which is scary because that's what Kirby Smart's known for. And their offense has been solid all year. I'd probably give it like a B. It's not an A, but their defense is certainly climbing up the ranks. Their defense is probably a B plus or an A right now. And the thing about Georgia is Kirby said it one time versus they've had a lot of close games this year, but they're hard to kill. They always seem to end up on top. They always do enough just to beat somebody. And you better believe me, they'll be looking for revenge on Alabama for beating them at home earlier in the season. Bama beat them in the first matchup 24-21. I think Georgia brings the D in this game, and Georgia's averaging about 30, 40 points a game. And they are the toughest team I've seen this year outside of Texas A&M, who had a meltdown last week. Some characteristics of them. But I think Georgia, I think this game probably be like 21-20 midway through the fourth quarter. And then Georgia just shows their strength and toughness, which says a lot about Georgia's strength and conditioning program. And if I was coaching a football team, I would make sure that my team could dominate everybody else physically. Like, we would PT, we would condition better than anybody in college football. Because in the fourth quarter, when the game's on the line, you're going to need that endurance. You're going to need that stamina to be able to outlast your opponent. If you've ever played physical sports like wrestling, especially in football, when you need a point in the third period to beat your opponent, and you have that burning in your chest because you're so tired. It's like running a dead-on sprint for time around the track, and you know you got to beat that time. That feeling in your gut, and then the crowd amplified in the background, it's like, who wants it more? And that's what Georgia does. And that's how physical you need to be to beat a team like Georgia, and that's the team Georgia is. And they're built for championships, man. I give them all credit in the world. I give Kirby Smart all credit in the world. And I think they scored 2 touchdowns mid to late in the fourth quarter in this heavyweight fight and deliver the knockout punch to Alabama. They beat Bama by the score of 35-20 in a revenge game. For the headliner of the week, honestly, I'm looking more forward to this than the SEC championship, believe it or not. For the Big Ten, you have a rare matchup of 1 and 2. The last time this happened in a championship game, believe it or not, was when when Alabama beat Florida in 2009. The beginning of the Alabama dynasty under Saban, when they dethroned my Florida Gators and made Tebow cry on the sidelines. Florida was 1 and Bama was 2. This year, Ohio State's 1 and Indiana is 2. And what I find interesting coming into this game as a headliner, so Indiana has not beaten Ohio State since 1988. Obviously, they haven't played every year, but Ohio State has the longest active streak over their opponent in college football, and that team that they have a streak over is Indiana. They've won 30 straight over Indiana. And just so as it so happens that they're playing in this game in the Big Ten Championship, and Indiana has the best chance they've had in 30 years to end the streak and beat Ohio State. Do I think they will? No. Ohio State is just too good. They've got a chip on their shoulder. They want to go back to back as they're the defending national champs. The only team that they've even been in a close game with this year, which is impressive in modern college football because NIL has evened the playing field. But the only team they've even been close to is Texas, which was the first game, and it was a 14-7 Ohio State win. You can make the argument that neither of these teams have played anybody, with the exception of Michigan for Ohio State. But Indiana truthfully has one of the softest schedules in college football. They play a bunch of cupcakes, man. And this is why I think, besides Oregon, I watched that game when they played Oregon at Alton, and they just outlasted Oregon. So Kirk Cignetti, their coach, he has that Urban Meyer, Kirby Smart type of championship mentality about being more physical than your opponent and outlasting them in the end. Strength and conditioning is important. However, I think Ohio State's just going to be too much for them. They have better athletes and arguably a better coach. It took Ryan Day a long time to get over the hump. He couldn't win the big game for a while, but I think he's finally, after winning one, I think he's finally up there and being able to win the big games. So I think this Ohio State will have this game in hand the whole time. And Indiana will be playing from behind. So I'm going to say Ohio State beats Indiana by a score of 31-13. For the ACC championship, God, this one will be a snoozer, man. I don't think anybody's really looking forward to watching this because, no offense to Virginia and Duke, they've had good seasons, but, those aren't, when you think about an exciting brand, those two aren't exciting brands, at least not in college football. Now, if you can go to college basketball, yes, this would be a great matchup. But Virginia and Duke, that either tells you how bad the ACC is or they just beat up on each other, which I think it's a combination of both. After seeing Florida absolutely beat the snot out of Florida State last week. So, but you can make the case. Miami is good. And that's what's so weird is Miami just fell apart, even though they'll beat you up. And I thought Miami had a great shot to make a deep run in the playoff and eventually win the national championship. But as Cristobal's teams do, they fall apart and run out of gas towards the end of the year. But honestly, I think Miami is still the best team in that conference, closely followed by SMU. But those teams all of those teams don't play each other, so it's hard to, it can be easy to exclude even the best teams if a worse team talent-wise has a better record because they've played crappier teams. It's like that's what kind of stinks about this conference expansion to add so many teams. Is like, okay, are the best teams really playing the best teams? And unfortunately in the the ACC, you don't have that this year. So that's why you end up with Virginia and Duke. That ends the pick segment. But I'm going to say, I got to give the score for Virginia and Duke. So I got Virginia over Duke by the score of 41-35, and Virginia will be your ACC champions this year. So I was thinking about this last night when I was talking to my buddy Billy, who's also a UF grad. He bleeds orange and blue like me, and we always send each other messages about how the team's doing and talk smack about our rivals and whatnot. So we were talking about Florida trashing Florida State last week, and it led me to think about a topic tonight to present to y'all. And I came up with Florida's top 10 rivalries as well as honorable mentions. And how I got these rivals was based on history as well as the amount of times Florida's played them. So because they're in the SEC does not automatically mean that they're a rival of Florida, especially since the SEC has expanded and gotten bigger over the last decade or so. But I'll explain why I positioned rivals the way that I did, and also a little bit about the series as to why they're rivals. And then I've got a few honorable mentions. So, the number one rival of the Florida Gators is the Florida State Seminoles. Some of the older geezer Florida fans that, like my dad, who grew up in the prior to the 1980s, would say Georgia. But Georgia, fortunately, doesn't share a state with Florida, obviously. So you don't have to hear about it if they beat you so much in the state as you would if the team 2 hours away from you in Tallahassee beat you. Plus, there's Florida and Florida State alum all throughout the state, whether you're in Tampa, Jacksonville, Miami, Gainesville, Orlando, Tallahassee, Pensacola. So this rivalry literally puts a wedge between friendships. I'm not lying, man. One of my best friends is an FSU fan, and we got into it, and he hasn't really talked to me since, so that's on him. But just saying, like, this one makes blood boil, and Florida, that's why I was so happy on Saturday, is like, Florida could be 0-10, and it would still be a great season to me, or 0-11, and it would still be a great season to me as if we beat Florida State for that one victory. That would be a successful season in my book because we beat our arch rival. Case in point, we're 4-7, and we ruined FSU's bowl chances. In the 90s, when I was growing up, FSU and Florida were neck and neck, and oftentimes, like, the winner of this game went on to play for the national championship or win it. FSU beat Florida more times in the 90s by, I think, 2 games than Florida beat them. But FSU in the 90s was really, really good. They had, like, every single year in the 90s, they finished in the top 5, and that was under legendary coach Bobby Bowden. And Florida had Steve Spurrier, who's also a legend. But Bobby Bowden got the best of Steve in the 90s, although what's sweet is Florida won when it counted. We beat FSU in a rematch in the national championship in 1996. And Florida obviously dominated FSU 52-20. I was at that game. It was awesome. And yeah, there's these fan bases do not like each other. Unless you don't talk, if you don't talk sports, they're fine. But I mean, we rag on each other consistently. And that was the rivalry in the 90s because both of the teams were so good. Georgia was garbage growing up. Georgia wasn't good until they were good in like the 60s and 70s and part of the 80s, but when Steve Spurrier took over at Florida, we just kicked Georgia's ass for like 12 years straight. I think they got one on us in 1997, but even when Mark Richt was there in the early 2000s, like Florida still dominated, even up until through Urban Meyer years until the 2010s, and then obviously Georgia got Kirby Smart in 2017 and changed this rivalry, flipped it on its face, and now Georgia's winning. So that's why some in the younger generation and then my dad's generation, those that went to school before 1990 would say Georgia, and then after 2015 would also say Georgia. But the rivalry that I grew up with that's most important to me and most people now, probably like 30 to 60, is Florida State. So moving on, Georgia is second, and I just answered why. It's also Florida's oldest continuous rival. We've played them for about 100 years straight. Actually, more so because we started playing them on a regular basis in 1912. But yeah, Georgia owns that series by 10 games. When Kirby Smart retires, maybe whenever that happens, or he leaves, maybe Florida will flip that rivalry. But who knows? Maybe Summerall will get the best of them. We'll see. Number 3, in my mind, what I think as a Florida fan would have to be LSU. I can't stand those idiots, man. They have the worst fan base. Granted, they have good people, but I got threatened when I was when I've been in Tiger Stadium before. Verbally, I got cussed out. Not threatened like they're gonna, but you bleep, 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 Gator, get out of here. That type of stuff. Or you suck. And that's not just 1 or 2 fans either. That's every fan around you. And they're all drunk, a bunch of drunk Cajuns. And they think they're better than what they are. I mean, yes, they have a good athletic program. They've done extremely well in football and baseball. Haven't won anything in men's basketball, so we got the edge on them in the 3 sports. And also academic prowess. LSU is one of the dumbest schools in the SEC. Their bottom feeder is tied with the Mississippi schools in Arkansas. And that's pretty terrible. They're a bunch of, I'm not even going to say, but because I got to keep it somewhat even though I'm not PC, I got to keep it somewhat respectable for my viewers. But the term I was going to probably use was inbred rednecks, somewhere along that line. And these two fan bases hate each other. And unfortunately, like, we've played LSU every year since 1971. And it's been about as even as a series as you can get record-wise. Florida slightly holds the edge, 34-32. 34 wins, 32 losses to LSU. And then there's been 3 ties between them. And then I think LSU technically had to vacate 3 games, but if they didn't, LSU would be winning by 1. But as it stands now, Florida holds the lead in the series. Unfortunately, due to the SEC scheduling, Florida will stop their annual matchup with LSU. I wanted to keep them, but that's not my choice. But at any rate, also LSU thinks they have a tough stadium. Honestly, I think out of the SEC stadiums I've been to, Kyle Field, where Texas A&M is, Neyland Stadium, where Tennessee is, and Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, the Swamp, are all 3 louder than Tiger Stadium. So LSU fans think higher of themselves than what they should, and I hope they get humbled soon. You can tell the passion in my voice why I put them where they were in the rival. Number 4 is Miami. I also can't stand those idiots. Yes, I got to give it to them. They got the best of Florida the past 2 years under Billy Napier, who was inept as a competitor. He just doesn't have that competitive edge, and that's why we fired him. Miami embarrassed us last year in the Swamp. I was really mad about that. And their fans. So Miami, here's the thing. They have bandwagon fans because they don't have a strong alumni base. There's probably more Florida alum in the Miami area than there are Miami fans, at least true Miami fans. When Miami's not good, those fans become Alabama fans or just stick with the Dolphins. They'll support the NFL and be like, oh, I don't care. And then they can't even get 20,000 people in Hard Rock Stadium when Miami sucks. When Miami's good and they start getting good, he sees people like, oh, I liked Miami the whole time. Yeah, that's my team. Gators suck. We owned y'all in the Swamp. And that's all they'll say. They'll troll your pages. They are terrible, nasty fans. They're about as bad as LSU. They will troll you so hard. But they'll be like cockroaches coming out of the woodwork when they're good. But you won't see them when they're struggling. So I'd say Miami has the biggest bandwagon fan base. They don't really have loyal fans at all. I only know one or two. My buddy Dak, he's probably the most loyal Miami fan. And I respect him for that and a bunch of other reasons too. But after that, it's Tennessee. Tennessee and Florida have been playing each other every year since 1990, and unfortunately that's going to go away next year due to the SEC scheduling. And unfortunately, Tennessee did get the best of us the last 2 years, despite a lopsided shellacking overall by Florida. Florida took belt to ass to Tennessee during most of the 90s and 2000s. And also, even up until 2 years ago, Florida, I think, won 11 straight against Tennessee from like 2005 to 2016. It was pretty embarrassing for Tennessee, and yet they're one of the better programs in the SEC, at least perennially. But Spurrier took that rivalry by the belt in the 90s and just laid it to Tennessee. And Tennessee fans respected Florida. You know, Florida owned that rivalry. They hated us, but I think they succumbed to Florida being better than them. But I will say something about Tennessee. They've got really nice fans. I mean, they talk trash. Every team has their bad fans, and some teams have a lot worse fans, as I've named. But yeah, I mean, they aren't as bad as others. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of animosity between fan bases, but I'm going to miss them as a rival for sure. Number 6, a lot of people that haven't followed the Gators for a long time would probably be like, okay, why are you picking this one? But this is a historic rivalry that goes back, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But my number 6 is Auburn. So Auburn arguably could have probably been 3 or 4 on my list. Auburn is the closest SEC school in terms of geography to Gainesville, to the University of Florida. I think it's only 4 hours between campuses, whereas Georgia's like slightly further away, 5. But Florida and Auburn played every single year until 2002. And then the SEC went to a weird scheduling model where you could only have like one permanent, back when they had divisions, East and West, you could only maintain one permanent rival from the East and West. And I think that was 2003 when they started that. So Florida had to drop Auburn because Georgia and Auburn had been playing longer, and that was considered the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Instead, Florida kept LSU. But Florida had played Auburn, I think, every single year since 1920s or 30s. Prior to that, from like 1930 to 2002. And there were some heated battles between them. It could have been later than the 30s, but I know it was a long time. I have to check that. But yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I used to hate Auburn because Steve Spurrier's great teams, I think it was 93 and 94. Auburn was on probation because Auburn's one of those schools that they get away with a lot of shady stuff historically. And they can do that because they're Alabama's little brother. Alabama is the brand in that state. They always will be. So Auburn's like the Florida State of Alabama. They can get away, since they're baby brother, they can get away with a lot of stuff. So they've been involved in a lot of cheating scandals, and they get some of those shady characters to be their head coaches and whatnot. And because of that, they were on probation for something Pat Dye did, I think in the 80s or 90s. He was a former coach, legendary coach for them. And Terry Bowden came in 1993. It was, of course, one of Bobby Bowden's sons. So his dad was a legend, and the apple didn't seem to fall far from the tree. And I remember this as a kid. Florida's teams peaked under Steve Spurrier from like 93 to 97. And I mean, Spurrier had good teams later on, but that's when probably his best years were. That's when he had Danny Warfel, and that senior class ended up winning a national championship in 96. But when those dudes were freshmen, Florida hosted Auburn. Or no, Florida went to Auburn, and I think that year, if I'm correct, Florida only lost 2 games, and Florida went to Auburn and was up 10-0 in the first quarter. and Danny Warfel, who would end up winning the Heisman. And this game wasn't on TV because back in the 90s, it wasn't like it was today. I mean, there were games on TV, but not as much. And it was only like cable and satellite. And when you were on probation back then, you couldn't, A, go to a bowl game, B, have your games televised. So Florida versus Auburn wasn't televised. Actually, they brought in a special jumbotron into Ben Hill Griffin Stadium so Florida fans could come and watch if they wanted to. And my dad went up there to watch. I remember that. But I stayed home with my mom, and we were listening to it on the radio. And Florida was up 10-0, about to score. We were on like Auburn's 5-yard line. Danny Warfel throws like an ill-advised pass, and it gets picked off by Auburn's DB, who takes it back 99 yards for a touchdown. I think Auburn ends up beating us I don't remember the score, but they ended up catching us and beating us by like 3 points. And that was considered like the upset of the year. But if Florida won that game, they would have been 10-0 going into like Florida State came. And we lost to Florida State because of a work done run. But that Florida State team was very good. They'd go on to win the first national championship for Bobby Bowden. And that was Spurrier's first loss at the Swamp. But if Florida wouldn't have lost that game, man, to Auburn, we would only have one loss that year. And who knows, we might have even had more motivation to play Florida State. So, and then the next year, same thing, Auburn came to the Swamp. It was 1994, and the same thing, they beat us in the Swamp, and they were still on probation that year. Terry Bowden's teams went 11-0 both years. In 94 they got beat by Alabama, but for his first few games, or for his first 2 years, they went like undefeated. It's unprecedented, man, how good that team was. Like, I mean, granted they cheated, but Terry Bowden didn't lose a game until the final game of his second year to Alabama. So he caught lightning in a bottle. But my point is, like, Auburn went for it on 4th down, and their offensive coordinator was Jimbo Fisher. And then Bo Nix's dad, Patrick Nix, threw a touchdown pass with like 8 seconds left on 4th down and beat Florida at the Swamp, giving Steve Spurrier's first SEC loss at the Swamp in 94. I remember being heartbroken because Florida was really good that year as well. Like, we ended up losing to Florida State. We ended up beating Auburn. We should have beat Florida State, but we tied them. And then they ended up beating us by a touchdown in the Sugar Bowl. We ended up playing them twice. But if a few things had gone Florida's way that way, we would have ended up playing Nebraska in the national championship in 94. But yeah, this is why Auburn makes me angry. And then they used to be like, that was the last team that shut out Florida too. So there's a lot of ancient hate between Florida and Auburn. And lately, Florida has been taking it to them. We play them next year. And that transcends over to the basketball court. It was great to beat them in the Final Four last year and send them packing. And then Florida beat Houston and eventually won the Natty. But that's Florida and Auburn. Thank y'all for staying connected. I'm sure this information, I probably go on a tangent. I hope it's entertaining, but I'm just passionate about this stuff. Next in line is Kentucky. Florida and Kentucky will be playing next year, continuing this rivalry, which most definitely transcends into basketball, because Florida and basketball are the only two programs that are worth a dang, and perennially, they're both blue bloods in the SEC in basketball. And Kentucky is the blue blood in the SEC in basketball and has one of the best overall programs besides UCLA in NCAA history in basketball. But lately it's transferred to the gridiron since Mark Stoops has made them competitive. Florida once had 31 straight over Kentucky from 1987 to 2018, and then they finally beat us under Mark Stoops. And they made a mistake firing Mark Stoops, and the rivalry's even been going to be more intense because not only do we play Kentucky every year, we also, our new head coach, John Summerall, is alum of Kentucky. He played football for Kentucky. So, and I was surprised by this. Kentucky, we've played Kentucky every year since 1947 in football. And Florida has dominated that series. The only time Kentucky, kind of dominated us was in the 40s and I think part of the 50s when they had Paul Bear Bryant, who obviously ended up creating a legacy with Alabama after going from Kentucky to Texas A&M and then Alabama. And second only to Saban as the GOAT. And Alabama's been so lucky. They've gotten it at two of the best coaches at their school. But that's why Kentucky's in there. Next is South Carolina. This kind of got heightened under Spurrier. We played South Carolina every year since they joined the SEC East in 1992 to 2023. And it's weird. It was weird not having South Carolina on the schedule last year and then this year, but they're going to be back on permanently as Georgia, South Carolina, and Kentucky become Florida's permanent annual opponents. But yeah, there's been some great games between Florida and South Carolina. Florida has dominated this rivalry though too, but Spurrier kind of escalated it when he was their coach. But yeah, I'd say South Carolina's in there at position number 8. Number 9 is Alabama. Florida and Alabama don't play every year, but there have been some slugfests between Florida and Alabama, especially the 90s and early 2000s. Florida, under Spurrier, dominated Alabama in the 90s, winning. We played Alabama in the first 4 SEC championship games. Florida won the East every year, and Alabama won the West. In 5 out of 6, Arkansas won it in 95 in the West, but Florida dominated them in the SEC championship. And then Florida would go on to play Alabama in 96 and beat them as well. But 5 out of 6 of the first SEC championship games were Florida versus Alabama. Alabama beat us in 1992, which was the first one. Actually played at Legion Field in Birmingham. And Shane Matthews threw a pick to Antonio Langham late in the game, a pick 6, to seal it for Bama. Actually, Florida had a chance in like the last minute, but then Shane Matthews threw another interception, but that wasn't his fault. The ball got tipped, and then Bama got it. Bama actually went on to win the national championship. I think I mentioned that. But yeah, they played Miami in the national championship that year and ended up spanking them. And then you talk about the Tebow years, man, when Saban stole that dynasty from Urban single-handedly in that 2009 game. Ever since then, Alabama's dominated this rivalry. I'm hoping next time Florida plays Bama, we'll change that, but we'll see. Florida's been close a few times, but yeah, we haven't beat Bama since 2008 in football, so it's been kind of one-sided. These have been intense games between Florida and Bama. And we share a border, so that's why I would consider that a rivalry. Number 10, some of you might think it's kind of strange, but we played Mississippi State as number 10. Florida and Mississippi State played each other, I think, almost every year from like 1960s to 1993. It's either 93 or 94. I think it was 93. And then they became like just another ship sailing in the night in the West. And we played them like twice every 8 years. But there were some intense games between Florida and Mississippi State as well. for honorable mentions, I would say there's been a few rivals in the last few years that Florida has played. Those honorable mentions are in-state teams. Central Florida and South Florida. Both of them are up and coming. They're like little brother, but both of them have notched one win against Florida. And we got to share a state with them. And Florida plays them, each of them, like every few years. I think it's in our contract. So I think the next time we play UCF is in 2 or 3 years. And then same thing with South Florida. So Florida got the best of Central Florida last year, but we lost to South Florida this year. So those are honorable mentions. Also, Ohio State. Ohio State hasn't beaten us, but they like to talk a lot of smack. Florida beat them in the national championship game in 2006. And then Florida also bested them in a bowl game in 2012. And then Michigan as well, I would say, is an honorable mention. Michigan's bested us, though. We played them like 5 times, and they won 4 of them. All of them being in bowl games except one. We played them in a Kickoff Classic in 2017, and they shellacked us, unfortunately. But Florida got revenge under Dan Mullen a year later when we played them in, I think it was like the Citrus Bowl or the Gasper, one of those. But yeah, Michigan has the upper hand, but I don't like Michigan. I would consider them like a Big Ten, like an honorable mention rival. But yeah, that's my spin on the rivals. I hope y'all enjoyed this segment of Ayt's Picks. There's going to be another one coming next week for the playoff games and the bowl games. And then there'll be some periodically leading up to the national championship. I hope y'all enjoyed Ayt's Picks this week. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which I'll be posting shortly after this. Y'all take care. Have a great weekend. And God bless. Aydt out.